Okay, so my name is Becky Anderson, and I work at Macmillan, and we have today Kathryn Johnson from Northern Michigan University is going to talk to us really briefly about how she uses LearningCurve and what her results have been. Her talk should be pretty short, and then you guys have the opportunity to ask any questions you'd like. Everyone is muted due to a volume control, but you can type in the chat field. If you type to MHE Marketing, that's actually me, we'll be able to answer your questions at the end. In the meantime, I'm going to make Kathryn the presenter, and I'm going to unmute her because it's much easier to hear her that way. All right.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining me. My name is Kathryn Johnson. I know this is a really busy time in the semester as we're getting ready to head out for holidays and end of the semester preparations where students are in a bit of a panic. So I appreciate you taking a few minutes so I can tell you about my experiences using LearningCurve. I teach a world history class with 70 students at Northern Michigan University. It's what we would consider a traditional on-campus course. And I've been using LearningCurve for 4 semesters now with great success. It has really created a dynamic shift in my teaching by helping me create a partially flipped course that the students find more engaging than a traditional lecture course. My plan today is to cover 3 topics with you. First, to take you on a quick demonstration tour of what the students see when they use LearningCurve. The second is to share with you some analytics that have helped me improve my teaching that I gather from LearningCurve, and then finally to share with you some of my student feedback. So I'm going to switch screens now and go into the actual LearningCurve. Minimize this and switch over to the student view. Okay. So there are several publisher-provided adaptive reading platforms available, depending on what kind of textbook you use and who your publisher is. I've had tremendous amount of success using LearningCurve, and I'm really happy to share this with you today. So when the students come into this adaptive reading assignment, the purpose is that it helps to promote their reading comprehension. They go through the process of answering questions. Down here at the bottom, you see a progress bar, and I started answering a couple of questions just to show you a little demonstration. Okay. So the goal is for the students to fill up their progress bar by answering questions to reach the target score. This is a positive reinforcement that students appreciate because it shows them they're working toward their goal as they proceed. And it's also adaptive. It's adaptive because they score more points for difficult questions, but the platform will automatically adjust to easier questions worth fewer points if they're not successful on difficult questions. If a student does struggle with a topic, the student will receive more questions about that topic to provide built-in assistance. And there are also several options available to the students as they struggle and if they find that they want some additional assistance. So the first is up here in the top right-hand corner. They can click on a link that will take them to the actual page of the ebook where they can try and search for the answer themselves if they don't remember it from their first reading. Another option they have is to get a hint. So it rules out one of the choices. And it's kind of a game-like format, you know, where you can, it's not exactly like Phone a Friend or eliminate a choice, but it's the similar idea. If they really are struggling and they really don't know what the answer is, they can click on Show Me, and it will highlight for them what the answer is. Of course, they don't get any points for that. That doesn't add to their progress bar down here at the bottom, but it does help them understand what the answer is, put it into some context, and then it gives this positive reinforcement of you'll get it next time, and you can be assured that the question will come up again later in the series of questions as they proceed through this activity. Another feature is the opportunity for them to take a break. And they can click on the little coffee cup here. So as students go through this and if they need to take a break, this gives them that opportunity to do so. So between the progress bar, the built-in supports with the hints, taking a break, the text, the link to the ebook, And then once they fill up their progress bar down here at the bottom, they receive full credit upon completion. So all of these emphasize to the students that the goal is learning rather than proving what was learned, like in a formal summit assessment. So this gives me a lot of reason to be excited about LearningCurve, especially because it's transformed my teaching, where my students come to class mostly prepared and mostly already understanding the baseline knowledge I want them to take away from the reading. This means we can spend more class time on understanding difficult concepts, critically analyzing primary sources, creating and supporting arguments based on evidence, drawing connections to patterns in world history, engaging in small group activities, and even whole class debates, which I've been told is quite ambitious considering I have 70 students in a large lecture class. And all of that is possible because students show me they understand at least most of the textbook reading by completing LearningCurve, which means I don't have to spend my time in class remediating and repeating that information with a lecture. Okay. So next I'll show you an example of how I use the analytics provided by LearningCurve to tailor my teaching. This is an example of what I see from the instructor view. Okay. This particular example is specific to my world history course, of course, but it can be applied to any academic discipline because the way the information is shown will be in the same format, broken down by chapter subsection. I can look at this information and quickly discern two things. The first is that I can take a glance at this the day before I go in to teach, and I can quickly determine which topics my students are already excelling in, for example, the 73% here, and where my students really need more assistance compared to the 59% here. Okay. And what I think is particularly interesting is now that I've used LearningCurve for 4 semesters, I've discovered this pattern where every single semester my students score particularly poorly on this first subsection, which is class and caste in India. So I used this data to spark my own inquiry into why the students have such a hard time with this content. And what my conclusion is that I think it's because the vocabulary is so foreign to them. So knowing this, I transformed my in-class activities to promote student learning, focusing entirely on that one subsection of the chapter text. So for example, I've done 2 things. The first is I now incorporated an interactive vocabulary translation learning experience in class where students work with a partner to rephrase unknown terms like samsara and moksha into their own words to create a sentence that logically makes sense when they rephrase it themselves. Students love that we can spend time in class enhancing their understanding of difficult concepts using active learning strategies instead of listening to another lecture. The second thing is that I've been able to incorporate an excerpt of a documentary film showing long-term consequences of the persistence of the caste system in what is today the world's largest democracy in India. This documentary excerpt elicits really strong responses from the students who then engage in a discussion and a written reflection on the juxtaposition of the practice of such extreme inequalities with how they think a democracy is supposed to work to promote equality. This helps them see how a cultural practice from the classical era still influences society today and engages the students in a broader philosophical questioning about society that's so critical to a well-rounded education. So you can see that those kinds of activities are very different from a traditional lecture class. And that's an example of how using LearningCurve has transformed my teaching by helping me create a partially flipped class where students come prepared. Returning to the analytics, I would normally click right down here with the show more results. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually flip screens and go to my PowerPoint again, because I've taken out my students' individual names here in order to protect their privacy, but this is what I would see on that screen. So this information is useful to me because it tells me how many questions it takes students to achieve the target score. So you can see the target score is that they achieve full points once they've filled up their progress bar and achieved the target score. But you can see there's a great deal of variation in how many questions it took for them to actually reach that target score. So I can look at this and I can see, okay, a student who answered 37 questions was really well prepared, spent time engaging with the text before they sat down to complete their learning curve and demonstrate their reading comprehension. Whereas this student here probably didn't spend any time preparing. And what I've noticed is that there are students who I can look at patterns and see who are those students who chapter after chapter after chapter are taking this approach. And then I can really spend some time reaching out to those students and providing them a little additional support, which in this case they need. The third part that I'd like to show you is what my students say about using LearningCurve. So this is I use iClickers in my class with 70 students to promote more of the engagement. And I asked them this question, so did LearningCurve help you retain the information in the reading? And they overwhelmingly say yes. And this is a very similar response. I've done this for 4 semesters now, and it's always above 90%. And then the second question I asked them is, would you recommend using LearningCurve in the future? And again, the answer is always overwhelmingly yes. They appreciate the positive reinforcement. They appreciate that they're engaging in an adaptive reading assignment with built-in support, with all of the hints and the links to the ebook. And it's kind of like a game to them where, you know, we know our students enjoy video games. And while this isn't a video game, it is giving them that game-like atmosphere while reinforcing their learning. And of course, I love it because my students are coming to class prepared. So if you're thinking about incorporating some kind of an adaptive reading activity into your class, here are a couple reasons why I would recommend that you try LearningCurve. So it can certainly help your students be prepared for class by supporting their reading comprehension. If you're interested in using your class time for other activities beyond traditional lecture, this can certainly transform what you can do with the limited time that you do see your students face-to-face, so you are engaging them in more of the active learning strategies. It can also be useful to you if you want data that informs you about what your students know already and where they need more assistance regarding reading comprehension. You can really narrow in and focus on those particular content issues that are difficult for them to understand just from the reading alone. The students, from their perspective, it's also a very useful test review strategy, even if you don't assign it as a formal activity. It is particularly student-friendly in that regard. And then also, it's a very user-friendly platform. It's easy to navigate. It took me maybe 2 minutes to learn my way around LearningCurve the first time I tried it out, and was instantly very comfortable with using it and then figuring out how I could use it to transform my teaching, which of course has developed the more I've used it over time, but initially it's very easy to get to know. So I would like to offer you the opportunity to go ahead and contact me directly if you have any questions about how LearningCurve has transformed my own teaching or my own experiences using it. My contact information is right there. And then, of course, if you would like access to LearningCurve for your particular academic discipline and your particular textbook content, you can reach out to Macmillan and figure out who your rep is who can give you that access. And then I'd like to wish you and your students a successful end to the semester over the next few weeks. And with that, I'll transition back to Becky for any questions that are posted in the chat forum.
Yeah, so we have a couple. Paul, you have a specific question that I'll answer individually, but the bigger question was, does LearningCurve automatically link to Macmillan ebook selected by the instructor for that particular course?
Yes, my LearningCurve at least is compatible. It comes with my ebook. Yeah, so just for everybody, basically we, virtually every book that has a launch pad has a LearningCurve, and those questions are written for that book.
And so when you go and because of that tight correlation, when you go and look at the question for whatever chapter 2, it would then correlate to the book, the same book for chapter 2. And Paul, I'll answer the thing about Launchpad Solo since that's different because it isn't associated with the book. I'll email you about that. How does this change your syllabus using LearningCurve, like what percentages and such?
That's a good question, and I keep experimenting with that as I proceed with using LearningCurve and incorporating more Launchpad activities into my teaching. So initially, the first time I used it, I made it a tiny percentage of the points because I just didn't know what I was getting into, and I didn't want to force my students to use it until I was comfortable with it. But now I've gotten to a point where I have a reading comprehension category in my syllabus, and so now that reading category is 25% of the total grade. So that's a combination of completing LearningCurve activities, and then also they do some really quick and simple iClicker quizzes in my class as well.
So is LearningCurve the only homework, or is there other homework you have them do?
I have additional homework as well, especially with the math quizzes that are particularly useful for connecting history and geography. I also make additional assignments optional or worth extra credit. For example, the guided reading exercises and the timelines and the flashcards. I recommend to my students and in some cases make extra credit for my on-campus class. And then I also teach an online-only class where I use Launchpad exclusively. And there I have all kinds of assignments that are required for credit. But I wanted to focus on how this has really transformed my on-campus class.
Did you notice that your instructor evaluations changed when you started doing the partially flipped class?
Absolutely. Yes, and in a very positive way. The students, we have 90-minute classes here, and so that's a long time for students to sit in their seats and listen to somebody speak in front of them without interacting. And I have tried to incorporate more active learning as I've become more comfortable in my own instruction. And so LearningCurve and having the students prepared with the reading ahead of time has been a tremendous asset in helping me do that.
So is there a certain percentage on that report you showed that indicates to you I need to spend more time in class, or are there ever occasions where the percentages are all in the 80s and 90s, and then what do you do?
Do you mean this report?
Yes.
Okay. I don't have a set percentage. I don't have a cutoff per se. It's more about comparing subsections to subsections within a particular chapter. So I might have some chapters where the students are scoring in the 70s in all content areas, and then it's not a matter of, okay, I need to focus just on one. Then I can pick and choose a couple things from each subsection to really dive in deeper and take the students down that critical thinking road in a new way, as opposed to spending more time here like I would helping them understand the basic concepts. So it varies from chapter to chapter.
Cool. And we'll give just a moment to see if anybody else has any questions. But if not, Kathryn, thank you very much for doing this. And for everybody else, we did record this. So I will post it to the community site. And then if you had anybody else on your campus or any colleagues that you want to send this to, I'll send you that information so they can go look at the link afterwards and see this is very quick little discussion of LearningCurve. So, Kathryn, thank you very much, and I hope the rest of you guys have a lovely afternoon and enjoy break week next week.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.